Love wasn't about being right or wrong, but about standing up and helping when your partner's back was bowed. Dallin R. Colin. Hey everyone, we are diving right back into the Enneagram and writing with how to effectively write Enneagram Twos. If you want more info on the Enneagram as a whole or on Type 2 specifically, I have those videos linked in the description for you. But now, let's get into it. What do Type 2s look like in fiction? 2s will often play a supporting role in stories, but I've found that more often than not, these warm-hearted best friends and mentors just steal the spotlight from their protagonists. And you'll understand once you see the list. We have Samwise Gamgee from The Lord of the Rings. We have Ted Lasso from Ted Lasso. Peeta Mellark from The Hunger Games. Uncle Iroh from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Boromir from Lord of the Rings. Lucy Pevensey from Narnia. Raoden from Elantris. Wayne from Wax and Wayne, he's a 2. Dolores Umbridge from Harry Potter. Dobby from Harry Potter. Cedric Diggory from Harry Potter. We got a lot of Harry Potter in here. Rowling likes those 2s, I guess. Krista Lenz from Attack on Titan. Hagrid, Harry Potter, there's another one. Pepper Potts, Peter Parker, and Aunt May, all from the MCU. Agent Coulson from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Baymax from Big Hero 6, and Princess Buttercup from The Princess Bride. See what I mean? Even though Sam and Iroh aren't the protagonists of their respective story, they help contextualize it and introduce hope, wisdom, and warmth into the lives of the protagonists. And I think that's a really interesting facet that 2s bring into storytelling. But now let's get into the weeds a little bit and talk about things to focus on when writing Type 2s. And then after that, we'll also dive into some possibly made up tropes that fit with the 2 archetype. And I hope you're ready for another rant, because it's time for writing from motivation, not behavior. Here we go. Creating characters based on things that they do, it can be useful if you're trying to create a plot-driven, character-light story. Well, let's be honest here. It lacks depth. And when you rob a character of their motivations, you get rid of the reason they're worth caring about. Writing from behavior is essentially takes what gives tension and investment to a character's arc and says, nope, can't have that. Please don't do this. Especially for 2s, because so much of the hard that 2s deal with on a daily basis are these false behavior-based images that are thrust onto them by themselves and others. Because when you write a 2 from behaviors, you end up with a mindless, potentially clingy, generic sidekick. But when you understand where the 2 comes from and their intimate relationships and the needs of others around them as well as their own, you get rich, moving character moments like Leaves from the Vine and I'm Satisfied with My Care. And when the sun shines out, it'll shine out the clearer. Hear the difference? I bet good money that you choked up at least once as I went through that list. And that's the power of a Type 2 written from motivation. And also, moving on from the mandatory rant, one of the things that often gets neglected in 2 characters is their intellect. 2s are, first and foremost, emotional and relational beings. They thrive on that social connection. And I find this often leaves them cast as the social butterflies or the loyal friends who don't have any planning skills or sharp intellect that is made up for by other characters in the group. I mean, this isn't the worst thing to do to a Type 2 character, because I believe that their strength and what makes them incredible is that emotional intelligence, that EQ. But it doesn't catch the full picture. 2s can be, and often are, wildly intelligent and really competent people. And I think to overlook that completely is a shame. Yeah, 2s are soft and kind, but look at where they disintegrate to. 8. Think about that for a second. I think my favorite example of this kind of duality is Uncle Iroh from The Last Airbender. I still remember that moment in episode 3 when I realized what kind of a person he really was. Up until that point, he was that cut and dry, emotionally intelligent mentor. He let Zuko walk all over him, he tried to encourage him to relax, and just kind of kept the peace with the disgruntled sailors. And then Zhao attacked his nephew from behind, and in a second he's caught the blow, thrown into the ground, savagely roasted the man, and then calmly thanked him for the tea and walked off. This scene shows how Iroh isn't weak by nature, but by choice, which highlights his kindness and love. Letting Iroh be competent and smart helped contextualize his kindness. So don't be afraid to make your two strong, smart, and capable. Another thing that's almost synonymous with type 2s is relationship. They have a lot of them. But zeroing in on that, I think it's important to process the give and take in those relationships. One show that did this really well was Ted Lasso. Ted starts out in a very giving role in the beginning of this series, trying to make his boss happy, build up his team, and untangle the emotional web of trauma of every single person around him, which is classic type 2. But he also has Coach Beard, who listens to him and supports him from behind. And there's also the gaping hole of what's not there, his relationship with his wife. And understanding the ebb and flow of these relationships helps us understand Ted better, because we also see his need, how much he's giving and how relatively little what he's receiving. And any two's goals will almost always revolve around people in some way. So just be watching those relationships, keeping track of how the two's feelings will affect their interactions with others. But now, let's get into what this archetype looks like at their best and their worst. And I'm going to try to explain that with some sketchy and possibly made up tropes. And trope number 1 is the manipulator. One of the interesting ways to use villains in storytelling is to change what makes them dangerous. Moriarty is dangerous because of his intellect. Sauron is dangerous because of his corrupting influence. And Darth Vader is dangerous for his space magic and mouth breathing? But I always have so much fun with the villains that are dangerous because they're persuasive. They can make you see their side, make you do what they want you to do. And if we're taking a 2 who's completely mired in the shadow of their type, don't worry 2s, we know you're not like this. This fits pretty decently, because above all else, 2s know how people work. They know what strings to pull and how to get what they want, and they can often direct bigger people to beat up the things that they can't. And so much of this comes from the 2's fear of being unlovable, so they organize their world in a way that puts them on top, where they're needed. And their tool to get themselves there is that intuitive understanding of the needs of others, or manipulation. And on the most basic level, there are 2 general ways that 2s show up as antagonists. The first is as the underappreciated minion, and I love this. This will often be the result of relational attachments rather than 2 leaning into that manipulation that we just talked about. But it lends itself to another struggle of Enneagram 2s, acceptance. Sometimes 2s will end up boxed in somewhere that they don't really want to be because somebody who gives them that affirmation has told them to be there. But then when things get rough and they have to grapple with what's really important to them in life, then that kind of starts to break down. And this situation usually ends with the 2 snapping and defecting to the good guys. And it's one of those storylines that just makes me giggle. I'm serious. I could read this arc over and over and over. It wouldn't get old. And if after all this wholesomeness you're thinking, there's no way you could write a villainous 2. They're too sweet and too nice. Then I have some words for you. Dolores Umbridge. It's not easy to pull off, but it most definitely can be done. Oh, there are a few factors that kind of play into a 2 antagonist. The first is that manipulation, but 2 villains are strong because every person that walks past them is a weapon that they can use. And I don't know about you, but that's terrifying. I mean, you see this with Umbridge too. She finds people who are hurt by the previous system, the ambitious kids that want to get ahead, and she surrounds herself with them. She finds out Harry's weaknesses and exploits them, using his stubbornness to protect herself and help her get ahead. Thank you all you wonderful twos out there for not doing this. We know you could, and we're very grateful that you use your powers for good. So, yeah. And I mean, the other thing that fits in with this archetype is the two's disintegration. Twos disintegrate to the type 8, which is a very archetypical villain thing. I'll get into that in the 8 video, but they can become like controlling and manipulative and like openly expressing that kind of buried resentment. And it's really interesting how this works with like themes of corruption and selfishness and servanthood, especially with these type 2 villains. And I think it's just an underused character structure, all in all. But the second trope I want to talk about flips the first one on its head, and that's going to be the best friend trope. This is one of my favorite tropes, just because it's so stinking wholesome. I think there's something in each of us that resonates with that idea of community, of lifting the arms of others when they're too weak to hold them up themselves. But that idea is even more powerfully ingrained in the 2 archetype. And I can't talk about best friends without talking about Sam Gamgee. Guys, I love Sam. Not only because he's a fantastic example of the 2 archetype, but he's also an incredible best friend. Like, over the course of the books, we get to see him sacrifice and grow in order to better help Frodo, whether that be leaving his hometown or following him out of Rivendell or even taking up the ring to finish Frodo's quest when he thought his master had fallen. And Sam's a perfect example because the character, he shows an interesting synergy, I guess, between the type 2 energy and the trope. Best friend characters are generally people much further along in their character arcs, people who are strong enough to help carry the burdens of the protagonist. You see this with Iroh too. They kind of fulfill a mentor role in the story structure, just kind of without the wisdom and experience. So this often means that a 2 best friend character will take on the more positive qualities of 4, following that integration path. And you can see this specifically in Sam's monologues at the end of each one of the Lord of the Rings movies. His energy is still focused on uplifting Frodo and holding his arms up, but he's also able to delve into the emotional nuance of the situation, going out of his way to find hope and beauty in the tragedy of their situation. And it's an interesting wrinkle, but I see it pop up all over with Enneagram 2 mentors and best friends. Another interesting interaction between type and writing is that you'll rarely find a type 2 main character. Whenever I see a well-executed 2 in fiction, they're usually a side character, or like at least a secondary character, like a best friend or a mentor. And on one hand, it's a bit of a bummer, because I think all of these types are amazing and deserve equal love and attention. But on the other, this makes a lot of sense for Enneagram 2s, especially as protagonists on the side of good. Because when the 2s are healthy, they love selflessly and aren't trying to manipulate their way ahead. They put others first and lift them up. So it only makes sense that these 2s wouldn't seek the spotlight. However, when they are in the spotlight, a key part of that struggle is when, how, and why they should be helping. Peter Parker's arc in Spider-Man No Way Home is a perfect example of this sort of story, and I love No Way Home as a movie. I know there were mixed thoughts, but I thought it was delightful. But kind of delving into that, we know from the previous movies that a huge motivator for Peter's heroics is guilt. Because of what happened to Uncle Ben and how that hurt his Aunt May, he takes the weight of the world on his shoulders to make sure the people that he loves are okay. In No Way Home, his actions start hurting others, and that guilt kicks in again. And then we introduce these villains, characters that Peter has no obligation to help. In fact, all logic says that he shouldn't help them, or something bad will happen. And this kind of exposes Peter's selfish helping, and makes him ask what he's really about if it isn't helping people. And he ultimately learns how to self-sacrifice, to truly give, and not just to manipulate. And, I think that's the heart of the type 2. even the unhealthy ones, learning how to love better. Wherever they are in their journey, twos are boundlessly loving people. And I think that inside they're always seeking how to love better. So when you write these twos, think about them in that way. Think of people who are always striving to grow in love in order to lift people up. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope this was helpful in clarifying who these wonderful people are and how to, honor them in fiction, how to write them effectively. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and, share this video with your writer friends if you found it helpful. And I will see you next time to talk about Type 3, the Achiever.